The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio with Dr. Alex Heublein and Dr. Josh Klapow. This is Adapt or Perish.
Welcome to Adapt or Perish, along with Dr. Alex Heublein, president of Adaptigent. I am Dr. Josh Klapow. And Alex, today we're talking about the promises and perils of global integration. Blah, 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 blah. A globe, it's a smaller and smaller world. We're all interconnected. I don't know why that makes me feel grumpy. I'm really not that kind of guy. I mean, it may just be the word that everything's global. But why is that good? Tell me why it's good. I mean, there's some obvious reasons, but tell me why global integration is good and not just frustrating.
Well, let's face it, it can be both. Okay. It can be both at the same time. And I think that's the fun part of this episode is, we're not just looking at the upsides, but also potentially looking at some of the possible downsides, some of the perils that we find. But, like you said, I mean, we're living in a world that gets smaller and smaller every day. Globalization is nothing new. But what we've seen, and I think the pandemic really highlighted this. I don't think it caused it. It just highlighted the importance of it, of being this truly globally interconnected world. You've got businesses, you got individuals, you've got people from all over the world able to collaborate better. And again, we saw that during the pandemic. We still see it quite often. You've got people that are going out there and they're integrating together with their data, with systems. They're exchanging information more and more every day. And then you've got organizations doing joint ventures, joint initiatives in wildly disparate parts of the world. And so there's a lot of promise to this. I mean, when you think about it, the ability for organizations to work more closely with one another, even though they're geographically separated, even though they're separated potentially by different cultures, different ways of doing things, but still able to work together collaboratively to drive innovation, to drive new markets, to create new markets entirely. Rewind 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago, you couldn't really do that. I mean, it was really, really hard. It was really hard to go out and truly do things in a global way. And even when you look at multinational companies 20 or 25 years ago, even those multinational companies were kind of like this confederation of a bunch of, individual country organizations or regional organizations. They all did business differently. They said, yeah, we operate in 62 countries. Yeah, maybe, but you operate in probably 50 different ways. And so now we've got the opportunity as technology evolves and as connectivity evolves, and we see innovations out there and collaboration and integration. We've got the ability now to do things in a much more consistent way globally. And I think that drives us to even greater efficiencies.
Let me pause. Let's underscore that. We have the ability to do it in a more consistent, standard. Well, I don't want to use standardized because you didn't use that, but more consistent way. And yet, right now every, whether it's every organization or every country or every region, everyone's bowing their chest up about the way they do it. Right. So there's an opportunity for both cooperation, standardization, and consistency. And then there's also an opportunity for everybody to say, we're going to do it different. I'm sure you've seen this. I see this in organizations just within the United States. It's not just competition, but even within an organization, not wanting to do it in a consistent way for sake of, if nothing better than to prove that what they're doing is better, different, novel, whatnot. So I guess one of the things that I'm really interested in when you talk about globalization, it's great at a more social level. When we talk about, we can play music and it can be heard, we can stream on Tony Kurre Radio and it can be heard anywhere in the world. And that's amazing. But how do you get cooperation with globalization? I mean, we've done a number of segments on getting your team buy-in and everybody working together. Where's that intersection between sort of the technology part of this, the global nature of it, and sort of the I guess the people part of it?
Well, I think it's a fine line you have to walk, because you're right. When you go out and do things in a global way, and you really do want to achieve at least some level of consistency in what you do, you've got to strike a balance between the local characteristics of what you're doing and the global characteristics of what you're doing. Not everything you want to be able to accomplish from a global standpoint is going to translate well down into local environments. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. So, I've worked for a lot of big technology companies over the last 30 years. And I remember the very first time I was working for a big technology company, and it was my first trip to Japan. And I got there thinking, well, guys, we're going to do this new initiative. It's a global initiative. Me and a couple of other folks were running this global initiative. And man, we ran into like just a brick wall. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had the technology to do it. But what we found was that no one was interested in doing this. They were quite happy doing things the way they were. But then also in addition to that resistance, we also found that there were actually some very legitimate reasons not to do it as consistently globally. There were market conditions, there were market characteristics within a country or a region that precluded some of the things that we wanted to be able to do. So being able to sort out which is which are the things that we say we want to be able to integrate and collaborate and work very consistently globally. What are the standards we need? And then do those conflict or do they complement some of the local activities? So being able to understand both what can be globalized, if you will, and what needs to remain regionalized. That's a hard exercise to do. And you're going to get it wrong.
I'm sorry.
You're going to get it wrong half the time.
Well, and that's really, so that's so important. I mean, we have that problem again. If you take any country, I mean, obviously we're in the US, that's a hard problem just when you have networks of an organization. They have different locations across the United States. So if it's in Europe or if it's in Asia, you're running into a similar thing. There's a difference between this region of the country and that region of the country in terms of whether it's the customer base or the climate or what have you. There's lots of variations. I guess my other question related to that is you kind of answered it. The idea of what can we globalize and what can we not, and where does technology? Give me some examples maybe of sort of the globalization and technology from your experience with Adaptigent. Not well, you were working with a different company, so not the Japan trip that didn't work out for you, but the other ones, because what does it actually mean? Does it mean to put everybody on a similar platform? Does it mean to be able to synchronize different time zones? Like, what does globalization and technology actually mean?
So that's again a great question, because it varies a lot from organization to organization, and being able to sort of map out what are we trying to do here. There's the old saying, I can't remember who said it, but it was some philosopher said, foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. I think it was Emerson, maybe.
Yep.
And what he was trying to say there is, look, don't just go try to do things for consistency's sake. There's got to be a reason and a business objective for doing this. And consistency isn't the only aspect to it, though. If you look at like we've been kind of focusing on sort of the inside of a business, right? How do I do things consistently, or as consistently as I can on a global basis? But then you also look at sort of the collaboration between organizations. And I think that's maybe even more powerful when you think about it, right? Because being able to go out and collaborate and quickly establish relationships, partnerships, distributorships, joint ventures, so on and so forth, being able to do that can be the difference between success and failure for a lot of companies. I've seen companies where they had limited penetration of the market in their own sort of home market, whether it was a country or a region. they established a partnership outside of their home country, their home region. And all of a sudden, wow, things blew up. I mean, it was amazing. The sales went up, profitability went up, because they were able to take what they were doing and sell it and deliver it in a global market.
Oh my God. You know what this is? Can I just stop? This is the US band who's like totally hot in Europe, but maybe have struggling more in the US.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. It's almost
isn't that it? This is David Hasselhoff in Germany.
Or the Beatles, right?
Well, yes. I was being funny. You're being serious. Yes. Yes.
Hey, but it's true with the Hoff, right? I mean, I don't know what the Germans see in that guy.
But you're right. I mean, isn't it a similar? I mean, obviously we're talking about technology, but isn't it the idea is we're not penetrating the market here, but we have an opportunity to penetrate the market someplace else. The difference is if you're the Beatles, you have to. There was a lot more to it.
Yeah. You actually had to get on a plane, do tours of the United States and other countries. And so, but that's when the Beatles really took off, right? That's when they became a sensation, was when they expanded sort of outside of their home market. Yeah, they were really, really good. And, a lot of Europeans knew them. And then they started to go global, and that's when the whole thing really, really took off for the Beatles. And there's countless other bands like this, right? You can look at Led Zeppelin or the Who or all kinds of bands, and vice versa. There's US based bands that went to Europe, and everything took off as well. So I think that this idea though of being able to establish those partnerships or those joint ventures or whatever it is you're trying to do, being able to set those up quickly is absolutely critical. And then being able to integrate them into your business processes. That's another critical success factor, because a lot of times we see sort of alliances and relationships, sometimes they'll dissolve just as quickly as you create them. And you've got this ever-changing market. So being able to go in, very quickly establish these global relationships, and then again, we've done episodes on this in the past, this idea of getting the people, the processes, and the technology aligned to go take advantage of those global markets. If you can't do that quickly, you're at a major, major disadvantage. So for instance, the company that I work for, Adaptigent, we really focus on the technology piece of it, right? How do we go out and get their sales system talking to our sales system? How do we go out and make sure that when we call on a customer here, that they're not calling on the same customer here, or maybe that's what we want them to do. So being able to not only integrate your processes between two partners, or sometimes it's even multiple partners, it's not just two organizations within a partnership, but you might have three. You might have a little triumvirate going on. And so every element you add to a partnership increases the amount of risk. It increases the complexity. It increases the timeline generally. So if you're going to do that, and you're really trying to establish these more global relationships, being able to go out and do it quickly is critical. And again, it's not just the technology piece of it. That's what we focus on, right? How do we integrate these technologies very rapidly, and how do we get at data and transactional systems and so on and so forth that are hard to get to? But again, you've also got to look at it from a process standpoint. Are we able to actually design processes that are going to work end to end? And so I'll give you an example. So for instance, we have partnerships with other software companies, and some of them resell our software. Okay, great. We get our accounting systems to work together, and we know how to process invoices and all that good stuff, right? But then you say, well, how the heck do we support these customers? Like, we may have a partner in one part of the world, and we say, okay, well, what do we do from a process standpoint if you're going to go out and resell our software, for instance? Well, who do they call when they have a problem?
Yeah, I've been in that situation.
They call us, right? And then, how much training do we do? So maybe you can handle the first call and figure out where the problem is, and you transfer it over to us. All that process logistics you have to work out is probably the hardest part of it, right? Making sure that you've got, a seamless process so that your customers think, wow, this is a great customer experience. I'm not having to go call people all across the world to go get help. I call one organization, the people that sold me this stuff, and then they handle making sure that things get resolved end to end. So that's a trivial example. But it's one that's very, very indicative and a really strong example of how you have to think through these things. And again, it's not just the technology. Yes, we can make our trouble ticket system work with your trouble ticket system technically, but if we don't have the right processes in place, we don't have the right people bought into it, we end up in a situation where this notion of globalizing things, it starts to fall apart. It starts to devolve into chaos.
So do you think if you come in and a company is like, again, it's overwhelming. They're listening, someone's in an organization, they're listening to you talk right now, and they see the need or they see the opportunity, but it's not out of desperation. It's not out of peril. They want to adapt, but they're not really perishing. Okay. Do you feel like you could come in as Adaptigent? And again, forget the technology just for a second. Do you feel like you can walk somebody through that? It can be walked through, whether it's with a consulting firm, et cetera, so that it's not just a bunch of words, and org chart models and all this kind of stuff, but that it actually can be walked through so that an end user, a client, doesn't feel like, okay, they set me up, not set me up in a negative way. It got set up, and now I'm trying to talk to 3 different countries and I don't know what I'm doing. I guess how feasible is this? And is it incredibly feasible if done the right way?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, it's absolutely incredibly feasible. I mean, people do it all the time, right? This isn't this isn't territory that nobody's ever gone out and explored. Companies do it all the time. But what we found is that, if you don't have the ability to kind of look at it end to end, it's hard. It's very, very hard. If you don't understand all the way from, hey, this system needs to talk to this system, these people need to talk to these people, this is where we hand off processes between partners or alliances or what have you. If you don't work that stuff through, it will come around to bite you, and you'll end up in situations where you go, oh man, none of us really sat down and talked through how this was going to work. So can you do it? Absolutely. And there are some great consulting firms out there. We work with a fair number of them. That's all they do, man. They come in, they look at these things and they say, here's what needs to happen. Let's map this out from end to end and make sure we haven't forgotten about some critical element of this in order to make it successful. And then you get into the, okay, let's go do it. And the let's go doing it part can also be really, really challenging. The first thing is that what we found when you're trying to develop relationships, again, we work with other software companies, we work with consultancies. And so one of the things that we've really tried to be very explicit about is what we call a triple win value proposition.
Okay.
It's got to be a win for us. It's got to be a win for whoever we're working with, the partner or the alliance we're trying to establish. And it's got to be a win for our joint customers. And if any of those 3 criteria aren't met, you can globalize things all day long, but they don't go anywhere. Because somebody along that value chain is thinking, well, what's in it for me, man? Like, what am I getting out of this deal? And so I think that again, whether you're talking about supply chains or you're talking about technology alliances or you're talking about, just going out and working with distributors or resellers or whatever sort of joint venture you're trying to do, if you don't have that triple win value proposition, I have rarely, maybe never, I'd have to really think about it, but I've rarely, if ever, seen those global collaborative exercises work, because at some point in that value chain, someone's saying, wait a minute, what's in it for me?
So, a lot of what you do and your organization does is you work with large companies, large multinational, but there are people listening to this and they're going, well, okay, this is great. But we're small. Maybe super small, but I don't know. Maybe we've got a couple connections globally. I guess the question is, and here's where I'm trying to wrap my head around. This is where I'm struggling. Help me, Alex, because I'm struggling right now. You think about social media again, you think about digital streaming services, and it's all global, right? There are no boundaries. You hear it, see it, watch it, engage with it, everywhere. Your 5-year-old's a little young, but my kids, we can talk to anybody. There are essentially no boundaries. And in that way, something as simple as that, communication at that level, it's been done for us, right? The social media platforms, et cetera. We just do it. We don't have to think twice about it. At the same time, the way you've been talking about this at a large level, you're running a multi-million or maybe multi-billion-dollar company. There's a lot to think about. There are people and processes in place and companies and or organizations and divisions and agreements and lawyers and blah, blah, blah. What happens when you scale back? And I guess, what are your thoughts about a middle-sized company, a company that maybe has 100 employees? I can think of a couple companies I work with who are very global and they've got like 60 employees, but maybe just give us a little bit of a understanding of how this works when you're not some gigantic multinational global integrated entity that I think a lot of people think about when you hear the word globalization.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, the big multinational companies, I mean, they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, they've got most of this worked out. Okay, so for them, it's not a matter of how do we do it; it's a matter of what are the best technologies, platforms, consultancies, whatever. What are the best ways of doing it? Not so much, gosh, how do you do it, right? Because some of these companies have been operating globally for 100 years. Or more. And so I think you bring up a really interesting question is what about the smaller organizations and how do you do it? But I think a lot of the principles remain the same. It's not as complicated as it is, but you still got to really think, what is that triple win value prop? If I'm going to collaborate with other people, what are we all getting out of it? Right. So regardless of your size or the scope of what you're doing, that's one of the first things you have to define is what does that win-win-win value prop look like? And if you can't do that, don't bother, right? I'll just tell you can talk about technology and people and processes and culture and blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that upfront value proposition very clearly articulated and something that everyone in the whole value chain, if you will, buys into, you're going to have the same problems a big multinational company would have, right? So smaller organizations, though, I think the advantage they have is that they can move more quickly. They can try things. And if that thing doesn't work, they haven't gone out and spent, a year working out all the legal details and all the, all of that. They can pivot very quickly. And a lot of times that's what you find. I mean, I've seen little tiny companies, for instance, they'll say, well, we want to manufacture our physical goods. I mean, they may be selling a physical product. We want to do it in China or we want to do it in Vietnam or wherever. And so, they're able to go out and do it, but they're also able to oftentimes be able to change those alliances or change the collaboration that they're doing much more rapidly than large organizations can. So I think that's what they've got on their side. What they generally lack is experience. And that can be a huge factor in terms of success and failure on these things. Yeah.
Should we not be afraid? I'm just going back to the title. I was thinking you sent to John Mayer, or waiting on the world to change. Should we not be afraid? So when we talked about it, one of the last earlier shows we've done on digital transformation, and that was one where you rolled your eyes because everyone knows what it is and it's great and it's wonderful. And yet globalization has a much more daunting feel to it. But in listening to you talk about all this stuff, it's almost like it's a given. I mean, yes, you can mess it up and there are things you can do wrong. But as I was been listening to you today, I mean, the things that you're going to do right and wrong, those are important business practices above and beyond whether it's global or not. Would you say that, or is there something, or are there things that are absolutely unique to globalization? I mean, it feels like globalization is the world that we live in. That it isn't something that they do, or only this company does. Or do you see it as something fundamentally different?
No, look, I think it's becoming more and more ubiquitous. If you've got a business and you're just working locally, I think as you grow and you really try to drive higher growth rates, you're probably going to have to do it. You're going to have to do it globally. It's just the reality of the situation for a lot of organizations. I mean, sure, there's lots of local businesses. If you've got a plumbing business or whatever, you're probably not going to go global with it. But if you're into, any number of other industries that aren't sort of geographically proximate, where you need to be geographically proximate, not doing things in a global way can seriously hinder your growth. But I think the interesting point, and this is, one of the things we kind of talked about in the title, what are the pitfalls? What are the perils of doing this? And I think we've really started to see some of them lately. I think the pandemic really highlighted some of the perils of globalization. Where, just for instance, very recently, a lot of big cities in China got completely locked down.
Yep.
Well, what happens then if you've outsourced all your manufacturing to China and everybody, company in China, and their whole city is locked down and no one can get to work, no one can run the factories? Wow, now you're in real trouble, right? You can't ship products, you can't sell. So you start to look at things like that, and then also you look at current events like the Russia invading the Ukraine. That's caused massive global problems. So I think the lesson learned there is that, as we globalize and as we interconnect more and more pieces together, we can get amazing things. We can get great economies of scale. We can do things more efficiently. We can sort of, there's the old term about offshoring, but it's really right shoring things, doing things where it's best to go do them. But the sinister dark side of that is you also create this network of interdependencies. And a lot of times people can't always see those interdependencies. So for instance, you might be able to manufacture your product but then you go, oh, wow, how am I going to ship it? The shipping companies are slammed right now. Supply chain, there's shipping containers backing up at the port of Los Angeles. We saw all this stuff, right? During the pandemic, nobody could get goods. There was a lack of truckers. So it's not even just, where do I manufacture my stuff or how do I distribute it or whatever, but actually how do I get my products from one place to the other? That's becoming, I think we started to see some of the cracks in this whole system, this globally interdependent systems. What happens when there's a problem? What happens if there's a glitch? So I think you can over optimize these things. And I think a lot of companies did, and they're finding out, wow, that worked really well in the good times. But when we ran into some challenges globally from a macroeconomic standpoint or a geopolitical standpoint, wow, this whole chain of events caused everything to fall apart. And now we can't stay in business. We can't ship our products. We can't sell them to consumers or whoever it is we're selling them to. And the effects of that still go on to this very day. I mean, we see it every single day. Oh, I want to buy a new refrigerator. Well, it's going to be until, 3 months from now before you can get one. And you're like, it's a refrigerator, man.
Yes.
I'm not ordering a rocket ship or something. I mean,
I know.
It's pretty simple.
But so listen, to wrap this thing, you just brought this thing all the way back to the title of our show. And, when we started the idea is, in order to be successful, in order to compete, in order to maximize your business, you need to adapt to globalization, right? You need to be able to do that, at least for most companies. And now you've sort of wrapped us up with coming back and saying, that's not without risk. And so when those risks, or should those risks occur, you need to be able to adapt to the perils of globalization, right? That maybe perils is too strong of a word, but this idea that these incredibly tragic, unfortunate circumstances have essentially, like all humans, forced us to say, oh, crap, we didn't think about that. And, again, sadly, some organizations have fallen because of that, but others, it's lessons learned. So that we learn how to manage the perils of globalization through really, really tragic times. And it was so interesting to me about that. That's what humans are. That's what we do. We keep going until we hit a wall, we hit a wall, and sometimes we'd run into it 17 different times. And the people who figure out how to turn the other way, they do good. The others just get, I don't know, head injuries, and they just keep they do not adapt, and eventually they do perish. But I do like the way you've described this, Alex. It's globalization, and you still have to adapt in order to maximize it and or not to feel the pitfalls of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about that, right? And it's all about making sure that the technologies you put in place, the processes you put in place, the decisions that you make. I think what a lot of companies have learned is that, wow, I've got to really think through the broader implications of this. And then, to kind of put a bow on this one, and then you get into the security aspects of it.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part is, wow, we've got a situation here where what happens if some super advanced hackers come in and start to disrupt things? Before, they could only disrupt things locally, but wow, now they can impact things globally. So that's always a danger. You've always got to make sure that what you're doing is adaptable, but you've also got to make sure that it's secure, and you think through the security implications of what you're doing, because what you don't want is the whole supply chain or your whole business to be brought down because you're so interconnected, and you've reaped the benefits of that interconnectivity and that integration with other organizations. That can also be your downfall. So you have to be careful.
Oh, I feel another episode of Adapt or Perish coming on. But we're gonna have to be the next one. I want to thank everybody for watching us, and watching us in your mind's eye. Joining us on Adapt or Perish. Stay tuned to Tony Curry Radio, because that's where you will hear Dr. Alex and myself on the next episode of Adapt or Perish.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Curry Radio.